Video games tell stories. I don't care how cliche it is to say that because it's true. Whether you found the hidden pipe in Super Mario Bros. That your brother didn't, or chose Bulbasaur in Pokemon and got them to level 100, your experience is unique to you and your playthrough. Sure, you could argue that video games have always been like that, but as technology and time has advanced, video games simply have gotten more personalized. Too personalized. Like, why do I have to sign the terms and conditions to play Pac-Man World? Do you guys need my social security number as well? Nintendo consoles in the modern age have simply thrived off of gimmicks that add immersion, like the Miis, which oftentimes you could play as in games like Wii Sports and Mario Kart, and sometimes see in the background. Nintendo consoles are just so wacky. Look at this, a touchscreen? Who do you think you are? And to be fair to Nintendo, they've always been experimenting, dating back to peripherals like Rob the Robot and the NES Zapper. While Nintendo were the primary innovators between these new ideas such as touchscreens and motion controls, it wasn't unprecedented for third parties to sometimes take their swing in trying to push forth gaming innovation. And these outings would range from either complete shovelware to actually very novel attempts that could have been Nintendo games. An example of a company that ended up making the latter a lot was a company known as Fifth Cell. Fifth Cell began with humble beginnings, making flip phone mobile games with THQ at the publisher helm. Once the Nintendo DS was revealed though, they started shifting their attention to the cheeky little handheld. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the DS, 154.02 million of you to be exact. It was the first handheld that had a touchscreen. No. Jeremiah Slaxa, the lead director of the company, would pioneer 2 new series for the DS, specifically made with its control scheme in mind. I already talked about one of these series, which was Scribblenauts, a game where you could type literally anything on your mind and it would appear. Well, maybe not literally anything. 2 years before the first Scribblenauts game would debut, Fifth Cell's first outing on the DS was released, and this is none other than a scrappy little series called Drawn to Life. The concept was simple: an action-adventure platformer with RPG elements that let you draw your own character and the objects and weapons in the world. It spanned 5 games, with the newest being released in 2020. You know, no one talks about this series. I don't know if it's just placebo or I'm just that out of touch, but I see way less people talking about Drawn to Life than I see for the Scribblenauts franchise. Don't get me wrong, there's still a niche, there's still a pretty decently sized community, but it's something I don't see brought up in passing all that much. So screw it, someone's gotta do it. Someone's gotta dig up these old franchises and give them an old swing, document them, find their flaws, find what's good, and talk about them ultimately. But before we do that, since we're talking about games where you're tasked with being creative, it might perk your ears up to hear about Southern New Hampshire University, today's sponsor. On the JeffCompass web series, we typically analyze and look at video games in depth. As a close to graduating college student myself, a big regret of mine was never delving into any game design classes or education, especially after talking the talk all these years and critiquing video games as my primary hobby. Well, SNHU provides you with a fantastic opportunity to study this craft entirely via the leisure of the internet and learn many important skills, including but not limited to programming, 3D modeling, and using the Unreal gaming engine. So next time we review a game on this show I don't quite like, you may have an academic and professional view on what the developers did wrong. How cool would that be? And get this, not only is it incredibly convenient, it's also extremely affordable too, with some of the best rates in the nation to kickstart your game development career. So while you're watching today's videos or any of my other videos and think to yourself, you know, I could do that, or I could do that even better, look no further than SNHU, a fantastic opportunity for learning game design entirely from your house and for incredibly lenient prices. If you're interested, either scan the QR code that's been on screen or go to snhu.edu/JeffCompass. That's going to be both in the description below and in the pinned comment. Thank you, Southern New Hampshire University, for sponsoring today's video. Now, on with the show. Well, our goal today is to figure out what led to the series' ultimate downfall and demise. It's important we take a little journey of the franchise to figure out just how exactly we got here. Can't look at the end without looking at the beginning too. So let's keep it simple and start with the first game, Drawn to Life on the Nintendo DS. No, it was for the Sega Saturn. Starting up the game, I'm gonna introduce you to a new video game character, you. Me? You are referred as the creator in the world of the Raposa, the little cat creature things. Basically, to them, you're a god. In fact, in Japan, the subtitle for this game was God's Marionette. We start with a mini tutorial that serves as the introduction to our role in this universe and teaches us the core principles of drawing. Now, you might be asking, what's stopping anyone from drawing something inappropriate? Nothing.
Nothing at all.
We meet Mary or Marie, I don't know, who do you think I am, a linguist? She begs us, the creator, to help her struggling world. I mean, you can say no. It boots you back to the menu.
Alright, productive day.
As we can see, this village isn't looking too good. It's gray, it's gross, there's some smoke clouds everywhere. What is this, Los Angeles? Alright, time to draw our character. Draw our character.
Okay, we need to sit down. You and I, we're gonna have a little talk, one-on-one. I can't draw.
I tried my best for the purpose of this review, but I'm no Leonardo da Vinci. You see this? This is the best you're gonna get and you'll like it. Drawn to Life has a surprisingly engaging gameplay loop. At its most basic level, this game is a matter of talking to villagers, playing a level, talking to villagers, and playing a level. Simple on the surface, but it does have a lot of depth to it. The gameplay is sort of like a hybrid between a traditional RPG and a platformer, which sounds like it would have been done a lot before, but I can't think of many games like this. I guess Super Paper Mario technically, but also not really. To be honest, it's actually pretty novel. The reason we're exploring these levels is to recover the scriptures, which are little pieces of paper that give the ability for the creator to restore the missing objects of our village. Early on, we learn that the reason the village is in a bad state is due to our antagonist Wilfrey, who kidnapped the villagers and is spreading darkness. The reason he's doing all this was because he was salty he couldn't draw his own creations from the Book of Life. Hey buddy, get yourself a DS and a copy of this game. It's all you need. Well, after his mauling, Wilfrey threw away all the scriptures from the Book of Life right out in open paths. To be honest, his motivations aren't entirely clear, but I think he's a good villain. I like that he's just an evil version of the other Raposa, as it gives him a lot of relatability and makes his presence threatening, but not just stupidly evil or anything like that. The story does have a lot of religious allegories, as does a surprising amount of fiction, but for the sake of this video, I think it's best if we don't get too into that. So, what are we talking about first, the village or the levels themselves? Okay, we're talking about the levels. Drawn to Life appears to be your average 2D platformer at a first glance. To some degree, that's what it is. But of course, the main gimmick here is literally drawing some of the objects and scenery that helps you progress through the game. These drawings can range from aesthetics in the village to abilities that you unlock throughout the playthrough. There are many types of platforms for one, and occasionally vehicle sequences, but let's talk about the actual impact of drawing. You're given a defined area where you can draw, typically in a square or rectangle form. What's kind of disappointing is no matter what you draw here, the object is only going to be that entire square no matter what. So if you draw one line but it's at the bottom, you're not going to land on that line. The game will treat it like you filled off the whole thing anyway. This is fair enough if you consider the DS limitations, but I do wish it would just treat it like you didn't draw the whole thing, as it makes the drawing feel a little bit less personable and a bit more like a gimmick. Sometimes I would get kind of lazy and just fill out an entire square just so I knew the exact dimensions of where that block contained, because even a few lines of invisible pixels would mess up my timing when jumping. On top of that though, lots of objects in mid to late game you draw are just filling in shapes and templates, which, don't get me wrong, you can still kind of have some fun with it, but it would have been nice to just be able to draw whatever we wanted. Instead, it kind of comes off like color a dinosaur for the NES. I might be the first person who ever made that comparison.
I hope you're proud of me, Mom.
The drawing itself is serviceable, but it's not perfect. You are given a pretty fair amount of tools here. Brush stroke sizes, a paint bucket, stamps, and different palettes. What sucks about the palettes though is, let's say you want a color from palette 2 that's not in palette number 1, it'll convert every color to be the palette from the second bucket. I have zero clue what this does. The drawing system gets the job done, but what irritates me is there's no shape tool like how Microsoft Paint has. I feel that's a huge missed opportunity. I may or may not be an artiste or anything, but I can at least safely make this claim that the DS touchscreen is not the most accurate drawing tablet in the world, so if you want to make a circle, it's just not gonna happen. Accept it and move on. That being said, I'm sure there are some super talented artists out there who could put this system to good use. I'm just not one of them. Look, I drew Johnny Test. It looks like him, right?
Drawing is ultimately what you make of it. You could spend all day making something really unique and creative, or you could just draw a line and move on with your life. I think that's the perfect way to do it, because I don't think drawing could carry this game all by itself.
In terms of the actual controls, I played much worse, but they're still a bit awkward. To ground pound, you can't just hold down after a single jump. You need to continue to hold the B button while holding down. You can also look down by crouching, one of my favorite features, but it takes like 3 seconds before your view actually changes. I get that this game was released before the first Scribblenauts game, but it would have been nice if they would replicate what that game implemented, which is scrolling over an entire area with the touchscreen with a magnifying glass. Overall though, I never had too many issues with the control scheme. It's a platformer on the DS, it would have been concerning if they did mess it up. Seeing the drawing of your character move in the level is surprisingly fluid. I'm surprised they were able to convert it so seamlessly. You could take 5 hits before you become a skin-colored mannequin. It's a mannequin, okay? Relax.
I knew Wilfrey was evil, but I didn't think he was trying to get my channel demonetized.
The levels themselves are, again, what you would expect out of a platformer, but with lots of reasons and areas to explore. It's important to note, though, these levels are long. There aren't that many of them. Excluding boss stages, there are only 15, but as said, these aren't necessarily quick romps. Considering Drawn to Life is on a handheld console, I feel that's a bit inconvenient. You can, of course, just close the DS and pick up later, but if you're the type of person that gets anxious about not having a firm save, then it's important to note that this isn't the type of game you could just pick up and play. Some of these levels were a minimum of 30 minutes, but if I got really stuck on one, it could go up to an hour. In part, though, the levels are only really long if you care about the many collectibles and challenges. About half of them are required. These are the scriptures, of course, and the villagers who sit around in the shadow cages. There's also a lot of goo sitting around, which you can clean with the stylus.
I'm currently thinking about a timeline where I knew this was optional.
I despise cleaning this goo. It just takes so long. There's always a shadow enemy sitting around trying to make your life miserable. This means you're constantly going to be putting down your stylus to jump on the enemy real quick, and then you're going to be switching back and forth quite a bit in what should just be an action segment. Switching between the two control schemes isn't a big deal for the most part when it's just for drawing segments, because that's a specific time where you can take a breather and focus on your stylus. As a result, if they wanted these goop sections to be a focus of the game, they should have just not had these enemies pop up. On top of that, though, if you really think about it, it's just entirely filler and adds nothing to the game. The last collectibles are these little capsules, such as ability tokens and more drawing tools that can be later purchased in Isaac's shop. These, of course, are the primary reason you'll want to collect the many coins littered throughout the levels. Additionally, in the village, there is also a wishing well that you can plop some coins in to get rewards, like extra lives and songs. Upon putting 10,000 coins in, you're taken to a secret village that houses all the developers. Man, Fistcell just loved putting themselves in their games, didn't they? Here, Jeremiah says there's a flower in Wilfrey's lair. This was later confirmed to be a lie to trick people in a 2020 interview with the Drawn to Life community.
Alright, to make up for this, I put a flower in one point in this video. Leave a comment down below if you find it.
There are 4 worlds in this game, and each one has its own distinct gimmick. World 1, being a snow world, has the snowball gun. World 2 is a forest type of level and gives us wings, which aren't really like wings and are more like a double jump and glide. The 3rd world's gimmick is really irritating, though. For one, it's a water level, because for some reason, game developers always have to put water worlds in everything, and then gamers always complain. It's an abusive cycle. Well, at least the music's good.
Drawn to Life came out first.
This world's draw is the scuba gear that allows you to swim underwater. You also get a starfish gun, which includes a homing attack for enemies, but there's quite simply not enough ammo, despite it being necessary to progress unless you want to take damage, since it's your only attack underwater. This is a problem because if you run out, you are forced to die to reset your ammo count. World 4, which is a combination of a city and a hell, has 2 gimmicks. One makes you a giant, which is pretty exciting despite just being a visual gimmick, and you also get a sword. The worlds all have varied gameplay and new ideas being thrown around constantly. Some of these ideas are throwaways, but I appreciate them trying to shake things up regardless. For example, there are submarines, hang gliders, rocket ships. Functionality-wise, they may be similar or all not very in-depth, but you gotta give them points for at least trying to switch things up once in a while. Until the very end of the game, too, there's always new objects you can draw. And while I've already said this isn't the most impactful, I do think overall, this is a well-designed game.
Oop, look at the time. It's complaining o'clock, my favorite hour.
Not every level is designed perfectly, though. World 2-1 has one of the most pinpoint jumps I've ever seen in a video game, and it's required to progress. Look at this. I thought maybe there was an alternative route or something that I was missing. But the only conclusion I came to was that I needed to jump off this, a squirrel holding a dandelion.
As one does.
The timing of the jump, if you can even get the little rascal to get over here or respawn in the first place, is doable, but very precise. After a while, I looked up a walkthrough, and it turns out you can make the jump with the wings, but it's also extremely difficult. Your choice is either suffering or 99% suffering. Hey Fistcell, how about you guys take some mercy out on your audience, which are kids? In the same world, the game introduces these switches that move platforms. It looks cute on paper, but ultimately it just means you're standing around and doing nothing, which means I have to spend more time contemplating what brought me to this point in my life. Not only is it tedious, but it's really confusing and boring. The same level even has this giant maze-like abomination that's hard to navigate because everything is dark and the corridors are small, meaning that enemies gang up on you. I specifically hate these bats. Why is it always bats with these games? They fly from 10 miles away and are impossible to see off screen, something that specifically made the World 2 boss fight a living nightmare. Speaking of bosses, World 3 boss. You guys want to know my strategy for this one? I fire bullets and pray. I felt like there was no strategy here. It's a button masher at its core. Your fingers versus the elements of nature. The biggest problem is that you move so sluggish underwater. So whenever you die, it just feels frustrating instead of feeling like your fault. The bullets are also incredibly slow and delayed. And like the levels, they don't give you enough ammo here, meaning you're always waiting around for this clown in a cage to throw acorns at you. Come on, man, I'm dying over here. I know you have them. Help me out. Oh, thanks, I died. Thanks.
Hello, my name is John, game developer. We hear that you hate water levels, so we're gonna put them in every game ever anyways.
My last big complaint with the levels is that because they're so big and expansive and with so many collectibles, it can be a bit daunting moving forward in any given area when there are two separate paths. I personally started feeling nervous, like, man, if I continue, I'm gonna miss something. With the Raposa and the scriptures, the game will thankfully prevent you from moving forward, but that doesn't account for the tokens and the goo. At worst, it just means you'll need to do a replay or two of a level to get everything.
So yeah, I think this is a really good game by itself, but what makes this experience so special is its unique cast of quirky and lovable characters.
Earlier, I mentioned that the gameplay loop is doing a level, then going to the village and doing tasks, rinse and repeat. What's special about this though is that every group of 3 villagers you save are usually the ones you'll get to meet and interact with in this downtime. This works so well because it really gets you acquainted with these characters in chunks, and there are so many that I love. There's Farmer Brown. Gee, was Farmer McDonald taken? We have, of course, Isaac the shopkeeper. We have Chef Cookie, Count Choco. We even find a human. His name is Mike. I don't think I would care so much for this game's cast if it wasn't for this gameplay loop. There's so many of them I haven't mentioned yet, and they don't all add to the story, to be fair, but who cares? Look at these little guys. Lots of Raposa talk in different dialects too. I have no clue what this guy is saying, but he's supposed to be crazy, so it's alright. Maybe he has rabies. I just love the absurdity of it all. Some have normal roles such as Dr. Cure or an annoying kid, and this was the same sort of thing I really loved about Luigi's Mansion's Portrait Ghosts, the relatability. It's a great thing in games. It doesn't take itself so seriously though. On the inverse, you have Dracula. One bizarre stereotype. There's an Indiana Jones parody and pirates.
Man, what wacky shenanigans, am I right?
At the end of the day, this whole game is just oozing with charm.
Oh man, I got some of it on my shirt.
You know what I love? I just love the characters dancing around in the music. He's just vibing. He's just vibing out here. I have no other comment. It's just, he's dancing. Or how about the kid NPCs occasionally say a little line? Papa, bye-bye. That is so adorable. At one point, you have a snowball fight with your villagers. I lost instantly, but the idea of it is just so charming to me. This whole game has such dark undertones for the most part, with so many stakes to save lives and ultimately the world. But yeah, let's just have a little snowball fight. It's a reminder not to take life so seriously. In times of despair, there's always going to be moments where you smile and have fun. I feel like just having a mini game exclusively for world building is such a precious moment, and this is something that games don't do enough nowadays.
Funny enough, I actually did play this game as a kid. I was maybe 7 or 8. I remember beating it, but when I replayed it for this review, this is one of the few things that I distinctly remember, and I think that's because this moment is meant to be so special. Or I'm overthinking it and it was just meant to be some throwaway, but if you think that, you're no fun.
The world building doesn't stop there though. As I mentioned earlier, you can also occasionally draw objects to add to the village once you find more pages from the Book of Life. And shamelessly promote your YouTube channel. I'm a YouTuber, I gotta do it, relax. The best characters of this universe though are hands down Mary and Joey. It's not especially clear what their dynamic is. They're sort of like best friends that might love each other, and I respect the low-key nature of it. These are such interesting characters. I can't really really put them into any stereotypical character role. You have Joey, he loves adventure, he's impulsive as heck, but he's a good mixture of comic relief and the straight man. Mary, though, is a character that I don't think I've seen written in a game like this before, and her story really resonated with me. I don't know why it did, I have nothing in common with her, but I liked it, okay? To keep it simple, midway through the game, while at her secret spot, she's told by her father, who's coincidentally the mayor, that one day, she'll be the mayor. Throughout the rest of the story, she struggles with the thoughts of being responsible for an entire village of people. I can't say I blame her. If I had to deal with vampires, thieves, and pirates, well, I'd be salty at the gene pool for making me a mayor's daughter. I wanted to be an archaeologist. She's a great character, though, and arguably is the main character of the entire franchise. I do think sometimes the village segments are a bit too long-winded. It's not like every moment of hanging out here is roses and cherries. Sometimes you have to do minute tasks like hunting someone down or walking to this eternal flame that lets you blow away the clouds, and ultimately there can be a bunch of text mashing and debatably padding. It's not the biggest deal, but I gotta be honest, there were times where I was just kind of bored and wanted to get to the next level. Chapter 4 is where things really ramp up. The mayor dies. At first, I thought this was temporary, like this is a cute little kid's game. He probably just fainted. But no, he died at the hands of Wilfrey, no less, who now has the Book of Life. It's a really powerful moment, and you can't help but feel bad knowing that Maria's been stressing about this moment her whole life. Or like, you know, the past 2 or 3 hours of gameplay, but you get what I mean. What makes this moment so especially memorable, though, is that this cutscene happens right before you enter World 4-3, the last traditional level of the game, but you can't do anything about it. You gotta play, you gotta move forward. It adds a lot of tension and stress to the moment. Upon coming back, you face emotional abuse. You should have protected him.
What was I supposed to do?
You're useless, Jeff.
Alright, you know what? You help yourself, you ungrateful jerk. Shut up.
The entire last world is simply fantastic. For one, the levels here genuinely become difficult. It's not Cuphead or anything, but you do have to be decent at the game, and often, when you die, it feels fair. This level is called Windy Hills, but I'm pretty sure it's just hell, and they couldn't call it that in the game due to the ESRB. Alright, we have to talk about something though. The second to last level is labeled 4-3, and then when the next level starts, it's 4-5.
Hey, how you doing? I'd like to return my copy of Drawn to Life for the DS.
According to the cutting room floor, there was a code in the game for another level in this world, so I'm guessing they just forgot to change it, but it made me think there was a secret level or that I was missing something. In reality, they done fricked up. The final fight against Wilfrey. Oh man, I'm not gonna lie, this took me forever. It's a surprisingly difficult battle and really reminds me of something you'd see in an NES game like Castlevania. You have to sit down and memorize the patterns, and even then, get good, it's genuinely difficult. The first phase is against a giant scorpion, who I guess Wilfrey just has sitting around. It's a video game, not everything has to make sense, just deal with it. To beat it, you have to spar with him until you can push him all the way back, timing your sword swings in the process. But these little bouncy pads messed me up more times than I can count. These were definitely placed just to be cruel, and I don't appreciate that. The second phase has no checkpoint, so get used to destroying the scorpion because that second phase is brutal. Wilfrey throws objects that you created, which is a nice touch, but man, I wish I didn't just draw a skinny little line for whatever this was, because I'm getting hit by thin air sometimes. This phase kind of frustrates me because sometimes Wilfrey will take lots of damage, and sometimes your sword just goes right through him, and I don't know why. The game ends with us placing the final page in the Book of Life with Marie accepting her role as mayor. Joey goes off on his adventure. Roll credits.
What's the use? Anyway, I lose, and there's nothing I can do. Wanna know the truth? Yeah, I do.
I can't even make a funny joke with this one. While this game is no masterpiece, I wouldn't be offended if someone called it one.
Drawn to Life is a fantastic game. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't put it above like a 7, but I think this game does something unique that franchises like Super Monkey Ball or Jak and Daxter also did. It has parents and casual gamers thinking it's made by Nintendo. It's a very well-crafted game with lots of love, care, and attention, and it's definitely worth a playthrough.
Drawn to Life sold well enough for THQ to take a profound interest in the series, and the following year we would get a spin-off, Drawn to Life Spongebob Squarepants Edition. This was created by Altron, a Japanese game development studio known for primarily making licensed games.
Do you ever just mix orange juice and taxes together? Drawn to Life SpongeBob. Alright, fine, let's be fair. Drawn to Life SpongeBob is based off of a SpongeBob episode released in the golden era of this franchise named Frankendoodle, which released in 2002, years before Drawn to Life. And the episode and game concept are actually incredibly similar.
I will lose all my internet points for saying this, but I have never watched SpongeBob.
I'm not showing footage of this episode because I've seen how Viacom treats other creators, so I'm just showing screenshots. As said, the premise of this episode is eerily similar to Drawn to Life's premise. Well, kinda. This guy in a boat is drawing, you know, like all people on boats do. I don't know. I don't own a boat. The artist drops a pencil into the sea, and apparently, cartoons and humans canonically exist alongside each other in this universe. Or maybe, just maybe, cartoons are real in the human universe.
Man, SpongeBob really makes you think about society and life.
This pencil allows SpongeBob to draw anything he wants, and suddenly Frankendoodle is born, who hates everyone and wants blood. SpongeBob and Patrick have to hunt him down. They get into an epic duel that's so much cooler to see play out than via screenshots. And Frankendoodle is smashed into a book. The Book of Life?
Apparently Frankendoodle comes back later in the series, but I heard this show becomes complete trash after like 2005, so we're just gonna pretend it didn't happen.
There's a few things similar about this game and the first Drawn to Life, but a lot of differences as well. For one, let me reiterate that this quite literally has nothing to do with the first game in terms of story, characters, whatever. I mean, this is exclusively in the SpongeBob universe. The story in the game starts with the exact same premise as the TV episode, with an artist out on sea. Well, I think that's an artist out on the sea. It's so blurry that it might even be George Washington eating a moldy corn dog for all I can make out. Yeah, it's a masterpiece, alright. This time, instead of dropping one pencil, he drops pencils. Yep, plural. He remembered to bring two instead of one this time, but made the exact same mistake. Good thing he doesn't have a face. You know what? He'd be an internet meme in today's society.
3D models.
Okay, so this game uses 3D models, and to capture footage, I did have to use an emulator. Unless my audience wants me to record camcorder DS footage, and I'm just that out of touch. My point is, because of the 3D models, my game did lag quite a bit. I did speed up some footage here or there where I needed to, though. I just wanted to point this out because I don't think this is the game's fault, and I don't want to blame the game for the power of my technology. Anyways, Doodlebob's back because Patrick was trying to remember him and brought him back to life. I drew Olimar again, but I made him Sandy because they're both space people, I think. This game has a similar structure to the first game, but the village is a lot less of a focus. For one, the village is entirely 2D now, just a giant straight line, which I think is a bit disappointing. You still have a store via Mr. Krabs instead of Isaac, and this time around you actually get your own house, which you can customize with furniture you unlock. Who needs Animal Crossing, am I right?
Certainly not Nintendo fans in 2015.
Other than that, you can talk to villagers, and sometimes they'll have you draw stuff in the village again. So you know what? While it's bland and obviously a departure from the last game, most of the core features are still here. Here's where you can also pick between SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward, who all have unique secondary powers you can summon with X in the main game. No one really does this in their playthroughs. Playing the game, honestly, they actually improved upon the controls a bit. Color me surprised.
Wait, no, don't actually do it, don't actually do it.
The movement in general feels a lot more fluid, and the ground pound, instead of having to hold B while you press down, you can just press down in the air. Your hero can now crawl, which is nice, but the downside is that to look down, you have to hold down for a few extra seconds. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty similar, but there are a lot of downgrades, and unfortunately, not as many improvements. Rescuing villagers is back, but I'd say 80% of the time, they're just these generic fish guys. Occasionally, you do rescue a major character, but I feel like this is kind of a wasted opportunity. SpongeBob had been in the air for almost 10 years in 2008. You'd think they'd have plenty of characters they can include.
I can't believe they didn't have such classic characters like Plankton, Karen, Harold Squarepants, Bubble Bass, Angry Jack, Barnacle Boy, Craig Mamelton. Unacceptable.
Plus, the whole point of the villagers from the last game wasn't to just rescue them to have a collectible. The idea was you were saving people that would interact with your village and contribute to the plot. And there are a few that do that, don't get me wrong, but don't tell me a show that was on since 1999 couldn't come up with unique callbacks for literally every slot. Yay, I just rescued generic fish guy number 236! Also returning in this game is the goo, but they took it way too far here. In the original game, sure, it did slow you down. It was a bit monotonous. ridiculous. But look, I'm cleaning this giant pile of goo and the counter is only going down about 10%. What's annoying is enemies always spawn and come after you, way more frequently than the first game as well. Often, I wouldn't even try to beat them. I would just try to clean the goo because defeating every enemy was just taking so much time. Seriously, they got so carried away with this. Does anyone find this fun? It's just about as monotonous as doing chores.
Yes. I love doing laundry. It's so fun. Oh.
You can also draw friends that appear when you defeat the goo enemies, which is a unique concept, but it's not fun because I hate these sections. Here, there's a lot more of a focus on the occasional vehicles to switch up the gameplay. One of them crashed my game. Occasionally, entire levels are based around a gimmick, like this roller coaster level. It's honestly kind of nice to have some variety here, but it is important to note that while this game does boast 20 levels, which on the surface looks to be more than the original, a lot of them can just be like these 3 to 4 minute outings. You know, this is kind of a minor complaint that I didn't know where to place in the script. Why is it that some of the enemies we fight are just normal citizens? It's not even like a zombie or anything. That's just a regular fish guy. Why are we beating him up? I mean, we're just lowering the population of Bikini Bottom for what? For money? Frickin' fish? I guess it's hard to come up with evil guys in a Spongebob game. Did they really have to resort to ripping booze straight out of Mario? That's not even subtle, guys. And is that a Zubat?
Psst. Hey, can I copy off your homework? Oh yeah, just change the answers so they don't look like a copy though, alright? Yeah, right.
I would say the biggest problem with this game is that the level design is super frustrating. Why did they give this platform a black outline, you know, like every other platform, but decide to make it invisible? This looks like a platform, right? Am I being gaslit? Well, to get over this jump, all we need is a bouncy power-up. Boy, does this game love the power-up gimmick. There's a lot of them. I'll just give you a brief rundown. There's a helmet to stop spikes from crushing your skull in, a karate glove that punches, ninja shoes to jump up and down walls, shooting bubbles like a little girl, spike shoes because we're now ripping off TTYD, a feather hat, which is kind of like wings from the last game, and a net, which is basically the same thing as a punching glove. The problem with this game is that they don't always give you the exact power-up you need. To their credit, most of the time the power-up will be nearby, but every so often it just won't appear. For this jump in specific, I had to grind enemies for the small chance that the power-up would even appear again in the first place, which I swear feels like a 10% chance. Randomizing these power-ups ultimately just makes this game way more chaotic than it needed to be, and it happened a few times. This level in the Moon World took me a half hour, and I fell down a pit at one point, not knowing I needed spring shoes to ground pound a box, so cool, I can't get the citizen, meaning this level just wasted a half hour of my life, and the publishers got away with it too. But to be completely fair, the collectibles in this game are basically not required, besides rescuing a specific villager each level that gives you a key. Sometimes the levels feel deceiving. Usually when there's a slope, you can slide to defeat enemies and go faster, but sometimes it just leads to a bottomless pit, and it just feels like I've been punked, except no one is laughing. This isn't funny. These slopes appear constantly. You know what? Don't butt slide. Jump down the hills. This game is not about having fun. I get it. It's fun to slide, but if you value your sanity, just don't. The game doesn't want you to have fun. Half of the problem with this game is that the knockback after taking a hit is unnecessarily punishing. Could you be more overdramatic than that? I touched a spike. I didn't swallow rat poison. Chill. This game has a bizarre obsession with comboing you and destroying your self-confidence in the process. Like, you'd think they'd be a little more balanced because, you know, it's SpongeBob. It's for kids, not bitter, old, jaded gamers like me. This game just feels like it wasn't that thought out. Some jumps are absolutely ridiculous. Ah, yes, I love clearing jumps that are barely bigger than the height of my character. They introduce so many concepts that are annoying purely for the sake of being annoying. Whose genius idea was it to have wind that prevents you from getting on these trampolines, cleaning goo, and clearing jumps? It's not even that hard, it just makes the level unfun because you have to be patient, which in turn makes the game less fun, and upon every death, you lose more and more patience. As a whole, this game is weirdly difficult, but while the first game was difficult in a fair way that made you want to get better, this game is difficult in a way that made me want to cancel this video. There are constant beginner traps like the pits that lead to nothing, and don't even get me started on these enemies that projectile vomit. What? And the rest of the game isn't scot-free either. These hitboxes are absurd. I was nowhere near that eraser. It's like they downloaded it off of Google Images and didn't crop out the sides, so the bizarre empty space on the side of the image still counted. At a very minimum, the bosses in this game are fine, certainly easier than the first Drawn to Life game. You actually get checkpoints for one, so really, as long as you go in with 9 lives, you'll be fine. And yes, the game caps you at 9 lives. It's cringe. What am I, a cat? There's a lot more of a focus this time on using the touchscreen to scrub their health away, which honestly isn't too bad of a change. I can't imagine doing any of these in one life, but because you actually have checkpoints, it's manageable. Although this battle against Doodlebob really irritates me because you get a projectile, but it throws it in an arc. Not only does it throw in an arc though, the bottom of the ammo doesn't even hit Doodlebob. This game is sadistic. At the end of the story, we fly to space because they ran out of level ideas, probably. Why are there citizens on the moon? Did we go to an alternative universe or something? There's even a Bikini Bottom level up here. Okay. I wonder if any SpongeBob scholars are aware of the ramifications of this game, because if I was a fanfic writer, I'd be having a panic attack. You defeat Doodlebob not by killing him, but by erasing his smile and making him happy. SpongeBob is so wholesome. Ignore the part where we killed innocent citizens. SpongeBob does not like talking about that. I would say that's the game, but unlike the first game, we actually unlock a unique world after the credits. It's only 2 levels and very clearly just a bonus. This is a notebook type of world that really has nothing to do with SpongeBob, and the world turns upside down and sideways. That might sound fun on paper, but they flip the D-pad controls each time. It's super disorienting. Anti-gravity can be done well in games, but usually you're not supposed to flip the controls. Look at a game like Mario Kart 8. If you flip the D-pad instantly while switching to anti-gravity, the game would have only sold 30 million copies. The last fight is, whatever this is. I don't know. It's either a weird SpongeBob character I haven't heard of or some corporate sicko's imagination, and I don't know what's worse. There's also a multiplayer mode, which previously had been undocumented according to Wikipedia, so courtesy of Ninjastar Compass, welcome to the world premiere! It's nothing too in-depth. Fight each other for treasure that you can design, and also you can choose actual SpongeBob characters here. The longer you hold the treasure, the more your coin counts go up, and there are plenty of power-ups throughout the maps. This mode reminds me of the multiplayer of New Super Mario Bros. DS, but the small maps made it so claustrophobic. This is about in-depth as a Mario Party game, but not bad, I guess.
So like, this game is fine. I wouldn't call it bad, but I wouldn't call it necessarily good either. Like, I wouldn't go out of my way to play this. It's a type of game, you go to a game store, you see it, you're just like, give me Mario.
I would say enough passion and effort went into this where I would say it's a bit better than some of the licensed games I've played.
That's not a very high bar.
I mean, it does fine enough with the Drawn to Life concept. They clearly did try to make it similar to the first game, even without the original team present, and you can argue the 3D models are actually pretty well made for the time, although I've heard they're from other SpongeBob games. The movement is decent, but I would say this game has a bigger issue with level design than the first game, which is bad enough, but they also got rid of like all the charm the original had, which is, you know, half the fun. I also feel like they didn't really use the SpongeBob brand all that well, judging off these random world themes that really made no sense in a SpongeBob game. On top of these boring villagers, if you want to play the game, then I guess go for it. I mean, I can't stop you. What am I gonna do? Go through your screen and yell at you?
How do I get in here?
The next game is weird. I shouldn't even say game as much as I should be saying games, as in they have the same title, but are entirely different experiences. Meet Drawn to Life: The Next Chapter, released in 2009 for both the DS and this time around the Wii. So here's the thing, this type of release is not unprecedented. For example, the Pac-Man World games, they have their respective GBA counterparts, and even a game like Sonic Unleashed would receive different takes on the core game depending on what console you're playing it on.
Here's the thing, usually those multi-releases have the same level, same story, same gameplay elements. These 2 games have none of that. They should have been named different things.
Something like that wouldn't have been unprecedented either. Assassin's Creed Unity and Assassin's Creed Rogue both released on the same day, but for different consoles. Like, these aren't based on each other at all. In an interview with IGN near the game's release with Jeremiah and lead designer Matthew Pellicane, the latter would state that the Wii version is a prequel to the DS version. So let me get this straight. You guys made 2 different games, but both called them The Next Chapter.
I guess that technically makes sense, right? Like, Drawn to Life: The Next Chapter is the next chapter to the first Drawn to Life game, and Drawn to Life: The Next Chapter is the next chapter of Drawn to Life: The Next Chapter. They planned it out. It's genius.
Well, it gets even more complicated than that. In the YouTube interview he did with the Drawn to Life speedrunning community in early 2020, Jeremiah confirmed that the Wii version was basically all THQ's idea and product, that he didn't have that much to do with it, and that the Wii version is not canon to the franchise. Joseph Tringali would also confirm in 2020 that it is not canon as well. So we have conflicting reports on whether the Wii version even exists in the Drawn to Life universe. My take on it though is that I'm willing to believe Jeremiah and Joseph's final word on it. It's not like when they had a partnership with THQ they could just say the Wii version doesn't matter, guys. So likely the prior interview Pelican gave was PR speak. What's even more interesting though is that a Wii version of Drawn to Life was confirmed after the first game's success on the DS, and this was before a confirmation of a sequel on the DS at all. So my theory here is that the Wii version was designed independently by THQ and really had nothing to do with anything, but just to bolster sales, it would release alongside the DS game. Although, you know what? That still doesn't make any sense. If they were two different games, which they are, why not give them different titles so people would have a reason to buy both? It's just confusing. Parents are only gonna buy one version. My mom only bought me the DS version as a kid. There you go. There's your proof. I owned a Wii. But if you name them differently, it's like, oh, let's go. There's two games coming out. This would be like if in 2012, Nintendo released New Super Mario Bros. 2 and New Super Mario Bros. U under the same name, but the gameplay obviously is somewhat separate. Do you guys hate money?
So for the sake of this video, I think we're gonna take a look at the Wii version first, even if it's not canon. A developer did say it was a prequel to the DS game, so I think it only makes sense. So let's pick up our Wiimote and nunchuck. Oh no.
Yep, drawing with the Wiimote. Oops, no one really thought this one out, did they? I think in a room of corporate bigwigs, this concept sounds a lot better in their heads than it does on paper.
Oh, it's gonna be fine. The Wiimote is just like the DS because of the range of motion. It's the same thing.
The thing is, it really doesn't work. The DS touchscreen obviously works for drawing because you get direct feedback. You know exactly where your stylus lands for one, and you draw. It's not perfect, it's a cheap touchscreen after all, but it is a legitimate drawing tool. The Wii pointer has no stopping point. It's like trying to draw with your pen hovering above a paper. On top of that, holding your hand to the sensor bar is just naturally gonna be a lot more shaky no matter who you are. Now, this sort of thing was definitely not unprecedented during the Wii and DS era. There were always games like WarioWare DIY and WarioWare DIY Express, with the latter letting you play your creations one for one with the Wiimote on the TV screen. There were other games too, like Big Brain Academy and Big Brain Academy A Wii Degree, and this type of dual release continued well into the Wii U and 3DS era. The thing is though, all those examples don't really require intense precision. Drawing does. In fact, the Wii had a drawing tablet in the form of UDraw, and THQ did make a few games for that thing down the line, but it was after this game. Well, I spoke to a member from the Drawn to Life community, Guy That Exists, a very knowledgeable community member who helped me with some info for this script. I learned that the UDraw tablet was originally produced as a tablet for Drawn to Life Wii, but development on it was pushed back when it wasn't going to be ready in time. Gee, it should have just been its own separate game. So yeah, I hate to say this, but the drawing is just not workable. I wouldn't be surprised if there are artists who care more than me who can create really good art on this. I just filled in shapes and added stamps. I tried my best, okay? Actually, one really positive change to the system overall that I'm guessing was made because of the Wiimote is the addition of shapes like the Microsoft Paint tool had. This is the only Drawn to Life game with this tool. A recession happened a year before it. I don't think it's a coincidence, okay? Another unintended positive is now the stamps. You know what? This actually gave me a reason to use them. I don't think they were intended to be of a higher value, but they are to me.
The game itself, okay. It's like if you made a movie of the DS version and then made a game based off of that movie.
So like, look, most of the characters return. Mary, Joey, Mike, Farmer Brown, and obviously you're the hero. And it's all very Drawn to Life-ish, but it doesn't really feel like any characters are from the DS game. At the very least, they don't have the same charm. Everyone talks the same. I can't really tell any characters apart. Someone like Crazy Barks was hilarious in the first game, always spewing complete nonsense that's impossible to read. But here he's just like barking. It's kind of a soulless story, and since it's not canon, we don't really have a lot of reason to care. But to give a brief recap, objects from the city are disappearing and no one knows why, so we're exploring levels to figure it out. I'm not even simplifying it that much. That's pretty much the entire story. There are occasional cutscenes that are drawn nicely, and I did like these, but I still never once felt hooked on this game's narrative. It's pretty obvious that this game was developed independently of the main franchise, and if you need more proof, look at everything else. The village is 2D, the characters are now 3D instead of being sprites, the menus and world sizes. It honestly feels like the Spongebob game, but Guy That Exists as well confirmed that the teams had little to no overlap, so potentially this could just be because of whatever THQ's formula was, although that's only a theory of his. So when I was saying this was like a game of a movie of Drawn to Life, I wasn't even wrong. That's what this is. It's an interpretation of Drawn to Life from people who didn't write for Drawn to Life. This game is nothing more than official fan fiction, and I could see why the original developers distanced themselves far from the product. But I've been rambling as much as Crazy Barks here. Let's talk about the game.
This is weird to say, but this game's actually not half bad. It's only about 4/10 bad.
The biggest thing I hate about this game is the village. Who in God's name thought it was a good idea to have this be a giant 2D stretch of land? It takes forever to get from point A to point B. You have to talk to people between each level to trigger the next one, which is kind of like the first game to be fair. And while the first village still took a while to get around, it was nowhere near this level of monotony. Sometimes I talk to someone thinking I triggered the next level to start, but then I realized that wasn't the trigger and I have to take a 5-minute trek to get back. Drawn to Life Spongebob had a similar village, but it was much smaller and had exits on both sides. Not to mention that one area was entirely optional and there really weren't that many intermissions between the levels. On top of that, this game has so many load screens and some of them are super long. The game loads for every drawing, every level entrance if you look at it funny, and sometimes it just loads in the middle of gameplay.
Wait, sorry, I actually wasn't done loading.
Gameplay-wise, this mainly feels like Drawn to Life Spongebob, as I alluded to, but there's one addition that I think was pure genius, which is drawing platforms on the fly. For one, this works with the control scheme quite well because your drawing can just be a squiggly line and doesn't require precision. This is one of my favorite additions of not only this game, but the entire franchise, and it really opens the gameplay up to a lot of unique puzzles that the previous games just didn't have. I complained in the first game how the drawing sort of just felt like an empty box that didn't have that much to do with what you drew, and this does a lot to fix that problem I had. The gameplay is much more interactive this way as well, although with the Wii sensor bar, the moments that require accuracy sometimes made me look like I passed out drunk when I tried to do them. Besides that, the gameplay is par for the course. It's a platformer with the occasional vehicle. We've heard this before, haven't we? This time around, you could draw a lot more than usual to the backgrounds of your levels, and this is probably the highest number of drawings for the entire franchise up to this point. It's a tragedy they did this on the Wii, not even just a simple tragedy. We're talking Shakespearean tragedy. Like, we have all these cool interactions with the world, but all I can do is like, okay, I'm tasked with drawing a rat. I'll draw a circle with the face on it. One problem with this game, and this only happened in the last world for me, was sometimes I would skip a required canvas without even realizing it. I got like halfway through a level once and there were no platforms. I reset the level thinking I missed the canvas somewhere in that area, but I couldn't find it. Turns out this was actually a canvas I missed from a prior level. And honestly, it's like, why is that even possible? In the DS games, normally there would be a canvas followed by an example of how to execute what you just drew. That is good game design. Here, because the game is designed like Sonic CD with millions of paths, you can easily screw yourself just by playing the level. And speaking of bad game design, one time I got soft locked when I got stuck on a corner. I pressed buttons for like 5 minutes, but no, I mean, I was stuck. I had to restart the whole level, and then, because I missed the jump again, I had to do it all over 3 times. Well, according to Guy That Exists and even various interviews I found online, this game did have a pretty heavy development crunch on it. I guess starting development on a console game meant to release the same day as a handheld game is probably not in your best interest if you're a game company. While Drawn to Life Next Chapter on Wii has a lot in common with the SpongeBob game, it still has some elements from the first game. For example, we're back to getting world-exclusive power-ups. These include a monkey tail, claws, return of wings, a BB gun, and ice skates. What this game doesn't take from either game, though, are collectibles. Like, yeah, there are stamps, pallets, stuff like that, but for one, the game doesn't label them onto the levels, so you never know how many you have to get or could be missing. And for two, there's no traditional collectibles, as in no villagers and no goo. But you know what? For the latter, that's actually a good thing. Visually, this game looks kind of cheap. I'm not crazy about the 3D models of the characters. They look creepy and feel like such a departure from the original game that it added to my lack of connection with the story. The graphics also gave me a headache. There were so many layers that sometimes I had no idea what was in the foreground and what was in the background. I think this game is a glitch in the Matrix and was meant to come out on the Nintendo 3DS.
Oh yes, Mr. President, someone has figured this out. This is not a drill. We need to get back to the White House right now, okay?
Towards the end of the game, we learned that one of the villagers named Serky is Wilfrey's wife and is carrying on his life mission of being a horrible person. Serki brings him back to life, and gee, who would have ever guessed the one villager who is a new character to this game exclusively would be evil? What's next? They're gonna say, I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you meddling kids. The fight against a revived Wilfrey is one of 2 boss fights in the entire game. What a low amount. The final level of the worlds were normally just regular levels, with the Shadow Realm ending in a 3-phase boss fight with whatever this abomination is. I had zero clue how to fight Wilfrey. This game doesn't make it clear at all. At first I thought you had to draw on these areas to attack this blob, but actually you have to punch the floating Wilfrey until he goes down to one of the squares, then draw a line, then punch from that platform. It's as annoying as it sounds, and even when I knew what I was doing, it still took me 20 minutes to finish. As for the idea that this is supposed to lead into the Nintendo DS game, they didn't retroactively try to shoehorn this plot in. Nope, not at all. At the end of the game, you don't get any cutscenes, just a festival with credits you can activate on your own accord whenever you get bored of talking to the same 5 NPCs. I guess the biggest argument for this game leading into the DS title is explaining how Wilfrey came back to life, but honestly, it's a huge stretch. That being said, it's not a bad game. I wouldn't call it a masterpiece though either. It's very far from that. It's flawed and honestly pretty uninspired, but maybe I'd say it's better than Drawn to Life Spongebob.
Yeah, I went there. So what?
There's really nothing in the post-game, but independent of the entire story, there are 4 minigames under the moniker Raposa Sports. 3 of them are the exact same thing, and the other is volleyball, and they're all generic flash games that I don't even know why they bothered adding to the package. You can draw your characters in sports equipment though. Yep, let's add this to the worst drawing game in the series. Good idea. These games could have been coated on a refrigerator.
Alright, let's put down our baby's toys. We're gonna play on a real macho console, yeah. Oh, there's a little smudge on my DS screen. What?
Drawn to Life: The Next Chapter on DS was announced the same day as the Wii version back in May 2009. According to interviews with Jeremiah Slaxa, this game, along with Super Scribblenauts, were meant to be the last hurrah on the Nintendo DS console. Fifth Cell gave up on the Nintendo DS before Nintendo even did. In the YouTube interview I keep talking about from 2020, Jeremiah states that this game takes place in only a matter of days since the first game. I feel bad for the Raposa. They can't go a week before some sort of world-ending chaos beholds them, especially if the Wii version is considered a prequel to this game. At least when Peach gets kidnapped, it's usually only on major special events. The story starts off with a much darker tone than any other game in the franchise. Considering how the first game ended, I feel like this couldn't have been avoided. There's secrets out. This is not a cute little kids game. Ignore that concept art. Instantly, we are tasked with recreating a vague nightmare scene with our chosen descriptions and drawings. Too bad I can't draw because this whole thing that was meant to be taken seriously looks like I was trying to be funny and I wasn't. The game starts with an animated credit sequence to set up the game, showing Heather, Mike's older sister, looking over a hill. And while this is compressed, this is still beautiful on the DS. She then gets consumed by darkness by picking up a ruby staff. She should have gotten the Sapphire or Emerald version. The village appears to be completely different this time around. Maybe it's geographically the same, but it's isometric now, so it's more of a recreation if anything. It doesn't matter, we don't spend that much time here anyway. After failing to make a new hero, the village starts losing its color due to Wilfrey, please gasp. Some villagers live and make it onto the turtle from Majora's Mask, and some get sent to various villages. Joey's back, by the way.
This escape from the village didn't even last like a week.
Eventually, you make the hero, but one thing that sort of frustrates me is that there's no way to bring over your hero from the previous game. I don't know if this would have even been possible. It's not like the base DS had any internal storage, but having the option via a trade like Pokemon would have been so cool. I mean, you can trade heroes between each individual game, but there's no connecting between the first and second. Even having a transfer between the Wii and DS versions would have been really cool. Nintendo did the same thing with Mii's occasionally, and it could have at least sort of tied the two games together in some way. Petty complaints aside, well, it's a Drawn to Life sequel, alright. One of debatably 3. The main village is no more. Instead, we use the turtle ship to visit 4 individual islands, which themselves are connected via pages like a book, which is a super cute touch. I have to say though, this village is really hard to navigate. They look detailed, too detailed. Your guess is as good as mine as to what's a wall and what's a pathway. Instead of having 15 long levels and a few bosses, this game goes for the approach of having many shorter levels, and each world has anywhere between 9 to 10 now. The collectible system is now simplified, which I feel is sort of disappointing, but it's been a downwards trend, so the first game is now the exception rather than the rule at this point. I don't know, with so many new towns and unique characters, I would have really liked to see the same treatment from the first title, as that really helped me invest in those characters. On the flip side though, it's not a bad thing to change up the formula once in a while, or else you get trashed like modern Paper Mario. There's still some fantastic stories told via these new villagers. We meet King Miney and the citizens of Lava Steam. King Miney went crazy with power due to Wilfrey, as those below him have to cope with being used. There's Galactic Jungle, which is a more basic basic story of literally just trying to restore color to the village, but in the process, we learn about the government that runs the area along the way, which is surprisingly in-depth, but by far one of the most emotionally impactful moments of the game takes place in the first world. This is Watersung Village. I thought these people were pilgrims. It's more so some sort of Shakespearean era parody with lots of fancy people. Yes, this guy is named Sock. This city is being tortured by a character named Salem. He is after what's called a promised conch, which due to a deal gone wrong, he got his hands on. As a result, the mayor, named Rose, will lose her voice, and as a result, the village will die. The story gets surprisingly dark, especially for the first world of the game. Like, give us a bit of time before you traumatize us, okay? Essentially, even though we get the conch back, Rose decides to not attend the festival and therefore plans to end her life, even knowing the effect it will have on her kid, Miles. My God.
My son, can you see that our troubles have run high? This is where we draw the line. This is where we say goodbye. You know what I want. What I want, believe it or not, I've already got. And I know I've got to go away.
She ends up living, but that doesn't matter. I still need therapy.
Could this story get any more grim?
Now, the next two villages are really not as depressing, to be fair. The final world, we'll get there. We'll get there. It is an interesting tone, though, that the game sets right out of the get-go, and the story is followed by Marie's internal conflict that carried over from the first game, her feelings that she was never cut out to be the mayor. Marie even goes so far as to support Rose's decision to end her life. Think about that. That's incredibly morbid. After all of this goes down, Mary flees, which I at first interpreted as her being scared upon seeing Rose's survival, which was induced by the creator, and realizing, well, there's no way out. I can't do this anymore. And we spend the next two chapters with her basically being MIA from the game. My interpretation isn't entirely correct, but the game's narrative is rich enough where I think it's possible to develop those complex thoughts before you reach the final chapter. It's a really interesting plot to analyze. Marie is such a good character because of her relatability. Sometimes we can't be our best selves. Sometimes we fail. She's not some perfect, flawless character as we usually see in protagonists, in a stark contrast to the mayor from the first game. Her dad, who was a defined leader, good at what he did, and he wanted to do it. Marie was never meant to hold the role of mayor in her eyes and has been having doubts since day one. Seeing it be fated ultimately reinforced her fears, and that's incredibly valid.
I think there's also a video game somewhere inside here.
The story isn't done, but I want to talk about the last world separately, as that's its own beast, and my credit card still hasn't cleared from my last therapy sessions. So yes, there's a video game here as well. The newest additions include two new forms, a blob which lets you go up the crevices and small paths, and a spider which lets you climb up walls like Spider-Man. Yeah, obviously. The blob sucks, it's very slow, and it feels unnecessary, but the spider is one of my favorite inclusions of the franchise. It has a sharp learning curve, but it's fun. Swinging from wall to wall, shooting webs at enemies, it's rewarding. It feels like a more refined version of the ninja power-ups from the Spongebob game. The only thing I hate is switching between the forms itself, because it takes like 2 seconds.
I'm sure this was an animation they were really proud of and not the DS being bad at loading. This is your fault.
The live drawing from the Wii version is not present, but there are separate drawing areas now that serve as puzzles where you're given a limited amount of ink to draw the proper platforms to get to the end. These are fine and a good idea at a very minimum, but they're incredibly easy and not hard to figure out, meaning it ultimately feels quite underutilized and not very fleshed out. The difficulty of the collectibles range from literally appearing at the front of the level with zero challenge or skill involved to practically impossible to find. What a hearty and healthy balance. Call this game a cereal. There was one level where I needed the spider power-up, but this was before the game even tells you it exists. So I explored this whole level for an hour before looking it up and realizing I had to come back later. The collectibles are practically useless anyway. If you get all the pirate coins, you can buy exclusive songs from Isaac's shop. Wow.
I'm so glad they added a way to listen to music. I mean, there's just nowhere else in this world that I could do it.
I feel like these coins are a scam. The tutorial says find them all to uncover a hidden treasure. How are songs that are sung and written by people in another dimension hidden treasure? There's also citizen coins obtained upon finding a villager. Same kind of deal as the pirate coins. Honestly, unless you want the extra challenge or the additional collectibles, I would not bother. Yeah, there's really not a lot of reason to explore these levels despite them being designed pretty well and being pretty fun, and that's especially when some of the coins are right at the start. New to this game though are jars of color. These exist in game to give back color to the overworld, meaning they're theoretically a really good collectible, but their usage throughout the game definitely whittles as it goes on. The color jars were actually very hard to come by at first. I had to go back into levels and grind for more color in World 1, but after that I always had way too much. Like, look how much I had left over at the end of my playthrough. This means unless you're really not focusing on picking up the jars, you'll always have an overabundance, meaning this gimmick is kind of meaningless even though it's a good idea.
So the lack of collectibles and reasons to explore definitely makes me prefer the first game over this one. That's not to say Drawn to Life the Next Chapter on DS is bad, but it kind of lacked that original charm and love that I had for the DS version, at least in the gameplay. But I'd say the story is a lot better. I like the shorter levels, but the thing is with the collectibles in the first game, it made me really feel like the game wasn't just trying to be a platformer and was trying to be its own kind of beast, which I think Drawn to Life 2 kind of lacks that sort of identity.
Here, the developers are honing in a bit more on creating a par-for-the-course platformer. I wouldn't be surprised if this was also a request from THQ, who were already trying to make this series resemble Mario. Thankfully, this isn't always just 2D platforming. The vehicle sections from the first game return, and there's even some entirely unique levels here, like killing aliens by dropping bombs from a spaceship.
But you can't talk about Drawn to Life, the Next Chapter DS, without talking about the pivotal ending. Well, yes I can, it's my video.
The next game in the series was
Silver-Series Cinemassacre.
Fine.
We end up at Wilfrey's Wasteland. Here we find Wilfrey and, well, Marie. Even the mayor from the first game makes a cameo here, giving this an otherworldly feel. Going with that theme, the bulk of the levels in this world aren't brand new, but more or less are recycled from the previous 3 villages. This was clearly done to cut costs, although there are still 2 new levels here. It's not a huge deal, but it is disappointing. If they wanted to go with old assets and cut costs, the least they could have done was reuse levels from the first game. At least then you could call it a throwback. I mean, Nintendo's been doing that for years now. They don't get called out for it that often. The final fight against Wilfrey is honestly really disappointing as well. There was almost no challenge, and it happened so quickly, I honestly didn't even realize it was the final boss. The bosses in this game were actually really good until this fight, though. Watersong has a fight against the pirate ghost Baki, which honestly might be the best in the game. Lava Steam City has a 6-phase boss fight, which goes on way too long. I don't know, I'm not big on it. It has okay gameplay, but it takes an eternity and a third to get through. And Galactic Jungles is also pretty bad, as you just mash dropping bombs on the same enemy. So the last 2 bosses specifically are way too easy, especially when you compare them to how genius the final fight against Wilfrey was in the first game. At a minimum, it's anticlimactic. Narrative-wise, it does start out with an automatic death, followed by a cutscene of everyone praying for your survival, which is an amazing way to build the stakes and the tension. So story-wise, the beats are there. I just think it needed to be an actual epic fight to match the heat of the moment a bit more. The gameplay is by far the weakest part of this final act though, and not the thing anyone talks about when they think about this game. So let's talk about this story, because on that end, there's a lot more to say. Right before the final level, Wilfrey tells you the stakes outright. Upon returning color, everyone will cease to exist. The reason Marie decided to make a deal with Wilfrey was to try to keep everyone alive by preventing this outcome and stopping the return of color. On the surface, this is quite commendable, as this is the ultimate sacrifice Marie can make to save her villagers, the people she vowed to protect, and casts doubts whether her running away in the first place was even out of fear or purely to figure out how to save her village. She's attempting to defy fate after seeing how the creator kept color alive with Mayor Rose. But the question arises, why does the creator want color to return to the Raposa under these circumstances if it means the end of the world? Well, I am going to answer this, but first, we need to address the very controversial ending of this game. Now, this is going to get heavy, and I do have to give at least a little bit of a content warning. So if you want me to skip over this game's ending, I'm going to throw a time code on screen. It's nothing too bad, but I thought it was fair regardless to offer. Drawn to Life, the next chapter ends with the villagers gathering around the eternal flame, preparing for the end. At one point, Marie goes up to Mike, the human villager from the first Drawn to Life, saying that Wilfrey showed her him. We then see the villagers dissipate, and Heather, his sister, repeats the exact phrases that we gave at the start of our journey. What comes next is another credit sequence with an original, beautiful song, where we see real-life interpretations of Mike and Heather in a car crash.
Couldn't live without, and I'm pouring my heart, and I'm spilling my soul, and I'm taking a breath, and he's giving his all, and I wanna walk out from the trouble I'm in, 'cause I'm really not sure where to begin. And if making it will make it better, better than it was before, and lies could bring us close together, so I won't be lonely no more. Pretending it doesn't matter could help me pass the time. Make believe he'll hide forever. This is real life.
I'm not crying, you're a baby.
This is one of the saddest things I've ever seen in a video game, let alone a game for kids. Mike and Heather do end up surviving, with the status of their parents ambiguous. Essentially, the events of Drawn to Life are a result of a coma that Mike was induced to as a result of this car accident. The reason the creator, and then eventually Marie and Joey, want to restore color to their world is because upon doing so, Mike will escape the coma and survive, thus ending the world that the villagers lived in, but sacrificing that for the greater good, a real human life.
So I played this game as a kid like I did the first game. This is one of the few things I vividly remember, and that seems to be a big theme. When I read online, people have that same sort of experience. But the thing is, for me, this is one of the first times I remember having genuine emotions while playing a video game and being that invested and caring so heavily about that story. And I think that ultimately led to me loving video games the way I do now and potentially making videos about them.
Video games tell stories. This one was bold, it was ambitious, and unfortunately, it was a bit too intense for a lot of children who weren't expecting it. Fair enough. I could argue that this game was sort of testing the waters with water song art, but it doesn't feel appropriate when so many kids were genuinely upset by seeing this moment. However, at least with my experience with the game, Drawn to Life: The Next Chapter is what led to me having an appreciation for narrative-driven games such as Xenoblade, Red Dead Redemption 2, and even narrative-driven series like BoJack Horseman. Even though all of this took place inside Mike's brain in a tragic moment, it only makes me appreciate Marie and her decisions throughout the game a lot more, because ultimately we're all trying to survive, we're all trying to do the right things in life, and sometimes we don't have the right answer. Marie panicked at first, making a deal with Wilfrey to keep everyone alive, but in the end she decided saving an actual life was more important than saving villagers who didn't even exist. She cared about saving a human, a villager who barely had a role in the first game, even if it means her and her friends and her lover would no longer exist. And it exemplifies that Wilfrey, as sort of a devil allegory, was trying to take Mike's life by removing the color, thus killing Mike, whereas the creator was trying to save his life by filling it with color again.
There's a lot that could be said, and I know this is kind of darker for a channel that's about having wacky fun with video games, but the fact that the ramifications of this story can be discussed to the extent that they are, and that the fact that we can analyze it so in depth from so many different angles, that is a sign of amazing fiction. And the fact that we're still talking about it to this day in any form means it did its job of being art.
It's hard for me to even think of Drawn to Life and The Next Chapter as individual games, as it's so hard to imagine one without the other. These stories and these characters continue seamlessly into each other, and I can't imagine not playing both of them. My heart almost wants to just lump them into one grand game, but if I were to argue rationally, I vastly preferred the original game's gameplay and vision. But it's close, and it's very close, and Drawn to Life: The Next Chapter has a much superior story to balance out its weaker gameplay. I don't think it's worth saying even if one's better than the other though. Both games, while not being the best games ever made, are something special, and you should play it if you can. It's also important to note that a Drawn to Life collection was released in 2010 for the DS, containing both mainline games. In this version, they changed the car crash into falling out of a tree, which, like, that's still sad, but a car crash is just so much more tragic. Whereas falling out of a tree, you know, it kind of just lost the emotional impact of it, I don't know. This was done in response to the ESRB getting complaints about the tragic ending of The Next Chapter, and future prints of the game would also have the tree ending.
Are you a car crash household or a tree household?
Regardless, the car crash ending ending is the official canon ending, and it is to be treated as such going forward. So it's important to note that the tree ending was purely done to appease the ESRB and angry parents across the globe.
It's time for the Dark Ages. After the DS and Wii games released, Drawn to Life remained dormant for nearly 11 years.
As I said in my Scribblenauts video, 5th Cell basically dissolved as a company following major layoffs in 2016. That's still a time period of 7 years without a game. It's fair to say that likely 5th Cell was focusing more on Scribblenauts in the remaining years, working on Unlimited and Unmasked during the early 2010s. A big reason for 5th Cell falling apart was allegedly their focus on a cancelled game, Anchors in the Drift, which was being developed concurrently to Scribblenauts Fighting Words, both of which got cancelled. However, we need to point out an important distinction. Drawn to Life as a franchise itself technically was not owned by 5th Cell. It was owned by THQ, which themselves faced bankruptcy in 2013. Can any of you gaming companies stay alive? THQ would auction off their franchises, including this one.
Going once for $3. Oh, going once for $3.50. Anyone else? Sold.
Drawn to Life was ultimately purchased by 505 Games. Really can't escape those number 5s. We weren't completely devoid of the franchise during the 2010s though. A Drawn to Life iOS port was released in 2014. It was not even widescreen. Why did you bother, guys? Apparently this port's horrible. As said, it's still 4:3, which is both disappointing as much as it is lazy. The sheer resolution does look really good though, but now it's deleted off the app stores because apparently it sucked. There's really not a ton of information about this one, but I at least wanted to acknowledge that it existed.
Someone cares about you, little guy.
You know why this game existed? Because Scribblenauts Remix was a huge success and one of the best-selling games on the App Store, so they said, screw it, let's do it with Drawn to Life, with none of the charm or effort. Gee, I wonder why it failed.
The Dark Age would end in 2020. Not for the world. Very much not for the world.
In late 2020, an all-new game for Switch, PC, and mobile phones was announced. This was Drawn to Life 2 Realms. It wasn't that much of a surprise though, as it was leaked via rating board listings about 2 months prior. 2 weeks after that, a trailer was leaked via 505 Games YouTube and was deleted. Like, come on, how do you guys leak the same game twice? The ratio of games to leaks. That's a lot. A new Drawn to Life game was something that was talked about during the dark years of the franchise though. In November 2020, executive producer Joseph Tringali, a veteran of the franchise, posted art for a failed pitch from 2017. These humans terrify me. I mean, to be fair, that's all it was, a pitch. The guy on the right is Mike, the people on the left are vacuum salespeople? I don't know. Unlike Spongebob and Drawn to Life Wii, Drawn to Life 2 Realms is a canon Drawn to Life game, meaning more or less Drawn to Life 3. Now you might ask, how is this a canon sequel when the universe of the previous 2 games ended and they established everything were only memories of an induced coma?
Because they retconned it so this game could exist.
Alright, that's not entirely fair, but it's basically the case. This game exists more or less because Mike still has memories of the villagers in his head. In the interview Jeremiah did with the Drawn to Life speedrunning community, he stated that Drawn to Life the next chapter wasn't ever intended as the end, and that you could always return to the universe because of dreams and memories and whatever nonsense they felt like having in that game. So technically it's fair, it just feels so weird to me though. Speaking of Jeremiah, he would not return to work on this game in any capacity. In fact, in 2020, in that same interview I've been referring to throughout this video, he stated that a new Drawn to Life game would still have to get his approval, but he likely wouldn't have been part of any of the production. Now this interview took place in late January 2020. Drawn to Life 2 Realms released December 2020, so unless Jeremiah was just being coy or specifically wasn't saying anything, that might mean this game had a development of like, what, 10 months?
So look, I mention this because I'm just gonna say it. This is one of the worst games I've ever played.
Listen, before the JeffCompass series, I reviewed bad games frequently when I was a teenager. The videos were amateurish, but my point is, I have played a lot of bad games in my life, and Drawn to Life 2 Realms, it might be in the top like 5. Smiles on our face, let's start with the positives. I love the graphics. They're really well made, and the presentation itself is really good. This is what I would expect out of a Drawn to Life game in 2020. I think the characters that were brought over look amazing, way better than the 3D Wii models, and of course, the music is as good as ever. The lead artist, Edison Yan, has worked on the series since the first game, and so did the music lead, David Franco, and it shows. Here's the thing, I would say the art and music is basically perfect, but everything else just feels off, which is bizarre, because this game was developed in part by Digital Continue, who had a lot of 5th Cell members on it and even contracted a few of them. I was surprised to learn that because it just doesn't feel like it to me. I have no clue where to even start with this game. How about the story? Oh God. The whole gimmick of this game is you switch between the Raposa village and the real world, where Mike and Heather live, and this is following the events of the tragic car accident, of course. I don't even know how to describe this story. Over in the real world, there are just these generic, evil shadow people who spooky and scary. Wilfrey's gone, although is implied to still exist, but this new villain is the most generic, boring character. I forgot his name. It's apparently Aldark. You know what? I don't understand his motivations. He seems to just like torturing people, which is kind of what Wilfrey did, but the difference is Wilfrey was an evil Raposa, and we saw his interactions and lore with the villagers in a much better written light, especially with the idea that Wilfrey is the devil. And who the heck is this guy? Satan's brother? Apparently Aldark is trying to mess with the minds of the real world to make Mike forget about the Raposa entirely, and it's like, why? If this is supposed to be the real world and no longer supposed to be a dream, then why on earth does he even exist? Do you get it? I sure don't. Why is Aldark even doing that? Just to be a jerk? Torturing someone after they had trauma that ruined their life. Mike just has the worst life ever. Like, everyone's just out to get this guy. The car accident is heavily talked about throughout the game. At one point, we meet up with the guy who caused the car accident, which is just some sheriff, and Mike refuses to forgive him, and we don't understand why the sheriff got into the accident, and it's just like, this feels like retcon territory. You're not going to convince me that this was Jeremiah's original vision for the narrative. It just feels like they added it to make a plot point. This wasn't necessary. The story is not tying up any loose ends. And near the end of the game, Joey just proposes to Mary out of nowhere, and then they kiss, and it's just like, okay, sure. Like, yes, throughout the original games, it's implied that Joey and Mary love each other and are meant to be together, but it's charming because they don't throw it in your face. It's just a cute little friendship. We barely even see Marie and Joey in this game. They don't develop at all, and it's just like, bam, married. Like, I like the idea of it, but you guys did it wrong. You wrote it wrong. I'm sorry. I don't know. Did any of the original writers even work on this game? Like, I have so many problems with this story. You can make a drawn-to-life game non-canon. It's been done twice before, and this game shouldn't have been canon if they weren't going to be able to afford to make this a full-fledged drawn-to-life game. Here's another problem. This game throws dozens of humans at you, and they're so boring. The original cast worked because they all got fleshed out. You learned about them for 2 games or solved their problems. They were unique. Here, hey, it's Jeff. Get away from me.
Don't mind if I do, thank you.
What a generic name. These people all say nothing. They say words, but they're saying nothing. I don't remember anyone besides the sheriff who wasn't even written well. And then there's Allie, Mike's supposed crush, who hates him all of a sudden because of the evil aardvark. At a minimum, it is nice to see everyone from the first 2 Drawn to Life games back, and they do represent all 3 villages we met in Drawn to Life Next Chapter DS. Thank you for something. But no one feels in character. Joey and Marie are just boring shadows of their former selves, and no one feels really important in this game. Like, everyone feels like a side character. So look, there are people who will ultimately say they like the story, and that's fine. That's your opinion, and I wholeheartedly respect it, kind of. Where some people may say that they don't care about story, period, in games. I'm one of the few people who play Sonic games, and I just tune out the story entirely. So I get that.
But if you need convincing this game is complete trash beyond the story, let me just tell you, this game either crashed or stopped working in a unique way 11 times. 11 times. 11 frickin' times.
This is completely unacceptable. I genuinely want a refund. I've never felt so mad about a game before where I've actually wanted a refund, but this, I feel entitled to one. 11 times. What usually would happen is a load screen would last forever and it would not go away. I would press every button and the load screen would just keep on trucking, keep on moving on, but I would hear text boxes mashing, meaning the game was still happening. I just couldn't see it. Sometimes pressing buttons during the load screens would mean I inadvertently edited my character. Screw it, we're keeping it. It's proof that this game is broken. So I had to close the game frequently. If it happened once, I wouldn't care, we wouldn't be talking about it, but this was a recurring issue that happened in my playthrough. And there's no universe or realm, if you will, where this is okay for any game. Super Monkey Ball Adventure. That game might be garbage. Not might, it is. But you know what? I could play it without it imploding upon itself. One time, I couldn't enter a door. I don't know what I was doing wrong. I pressed every button, like 10 times. I thought maybe it was my fault, or maybe I did something out of order. So I literally would just exit, mash through an entire conversation between Joey and Marie, which took forever, and have the same freaking problem. How does this even happen from a game design perspective? One time, I booted up a set of levels, and they just completed themselves.
What?
The UI was still present, but the next cutscene just started playing.
You know what? This is a positive. I don't have to play 3 levels. levels.
In the final levels, I think my Switch was on the brink of exploding. Look at the footage, look at the footage, look at this footage! And the frame rate, it dropped to like 3 FPS, maybe 4. There are games like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I think fans who say they didn't experience technical problems are either lying or just kind of fine with them, to be honest. But there are some people who swear by the fact that if you have it on an SD card, it'll run even worse, and you should move it to your system memory because that makes it an excusable problem. So okay, I did that with this game. It still crashed multiple times and gave me this abomination, so it clearly wasn't that.
And I do want to say I'm playing the Switch version, so maybe my problems are because of that. This game also released on iOS and PC, and probably those versions are better. I know the PC version is always the best thing of everything, so maybe it's just that. I don't think this happens to everyone, but I'm not going to sit here and feed you a false story about this game. This was my exact experience, and I think it's only fair to share it how it happened.
I'm also not going to take excuses like your Switch is old, you needed more free space. It doesn't matter to me. This has literally never happened with any game I've played on my Switch before. It could be because I played this game in long sessions, because obviously I'm doing a game review and I played it in like 2 6-hour sessions, but like whatever. Players should not have to adapt their whole Switch, their whole playstyle to play a cheap little indie game. Yeah, I said it, this is an indie game. In fact, I'm holding back by not going more into this. Bottom line, it's not okay, and honestly the developer should offer refunds to people who had the experience I had. It's not even about the money, it's about the principle of releasing a broken game more so. Like, I know this game is only $10, but that doesn't mean they can just sell me a broken product. Less content, less graphics, whatever, sure, but that's not a pass to release something this broken. In the gameplay, it's not good. Remember the first 2 games? Side-scrolling games with the occasional platform to draw, maybe some collectibles to find? Nope, this is a puzzle platformer. You either just have to get to a goal, guide dreamers to a goal safely, defeat enemies, or place toys in a convenient fashion to do one of those 3 things. The levels are no longer long outings. They're all bite-sized segments of longer levels. You talk to someone, enter their dreams to solve their problems for some reason, and you are met with a set of 3 or 4 levels, with the last one usually being a toy placement level. First of all, this is such a weird concept. The themes of the worlds rarely or outright never make sense with what the person's dreaming. Why would anyone have dreams of a side-scroller level? And how does this solve anyone's problems? Why couldn't it just be like the last game? You know, like a level select, a map. It could be picking levels from a trash can, for all I care.
You can argue that this game is immersive because of that. It's like a dream. A fever-induced nightmare.
You either face these levels via the game's brilliant story or by talking to random villagers who have quests. These specific ones are ranked via stars, which looks straight out of a mobile game, and that's when I realized, yeah, this was probably supposed to be a mobile game. You don't even draw in these levels. Why they didn't let us draw the toys at least is mind-boggling. Like, you had a golden opportunity right there, guys. Let us draw the toys. Let us draw the dreamers. You draw your character and occasionally object on the overworld. That's it. And the Switch version doesn't even let you draw on the tablet.
What? No. There's no way. They don't let you draw? Okay, I was wrong. Because now it's working. But in that one clip, like, I was convinced it didn't work because I'm recording it now because I'm just like, all right, well, you know, let me show you that it's not working again. But now it's working, so I don't know. This game is very, very inconsistent, but it did not let me draw when I started the game, so who knows?
You wanna know how the movement in this game is? Slow. Really slow. There's no sprint button. This, what you see right now, that's your top speed. There's no way to upgrade it. When you move across the map, you're also incredibly slow to the point where moving around is not fun. You can occasionally pick up these whatevers to get a temporary speed boost that lasts like 3 seconds, which means the developers knew this was a problem and didn't really want to fix it.
Ah yes, I have cavities. I'm gonna brush my teeth once a week and hope it goes away. Genius.
I don't know, the game functions, it's like, okay. Placing the toys to find the right solution can be fun at times. It's not like the core gameplay is horrible, but it certainly doesn't feel like Drawn to Life. Honestly, it feels more like Scribblenauts than anything else. Drawn to Life. More like Drawn to Lifeless.
Step right up, it's time for another episode of the hit series. Is this a puzzle level or an action level?
They're all puzzle levels and my show has now been canceled. Thank you, NBC. That's not even it. Here's a rapid fire round of problems I still have. Some of these levels are incredibly difficult, unfairly so even, and basically requires you to cheese the game to succeed. The toys and terrain are almost never exclusive to a level, so the theming is basically all useless. The hitboxes are completely nonsensical. Even when you land straight onto an enemy, you still take damage. There's no death animation, you just disappear into thin air. Levels sometimes make you wait like 30 seconds before anything even happens. There's a day to night cycle in this game for some reason, and it pauses you dead in your tracks to let you know it shifted, you know, like every good game AVGN has reviewed does. The girl in the cutscene owns a Sega Saturn and reminds me that pretty much every Sega Saturn game was 10 times better than this abomination. You could also argue it's an Apple Pippin, and still, every Apple Pippa game, probably better.
I feel bad for saying this. This is the worst Switch game I've ever played.
Listen, I know a few people do like this game, and to be fair, some stuff is subjective, like the story, and the crashes and glitches could have been exclusive to my playthrough, although from other reviews and walkthroughs I research, it happens to other people to at least some degree. The only positives are seeing the characters again, even if it's just more or less a callback, and the music and graphics were top-notch. But overall, what a depressing end to the series. You want to know what killed Drawn to Life? You want to know what killed it? It's Drawn to Life 2 Realms. The series was already in a zombie form for years, sure, and probably didn't have that much of a future to begin with, but upon release of this game, Joseph Tringali basically stated that the future of Drawn to Life, which could have been potentially ports and an actual full-fledged sequel, would entirely depend on the reaction and sales of Twin Realms. Why do game companies do this? They make a mediocre entry in a series, say, hey, if you don't want the series to die, buy our bad product. So I think it's safe to say that Drawn to Life, unfortunately, is dead, and we have not heard that much since this game. Listen, a sequel without many of the original people, specifically like Jeremiah and co, is not impossible to do. Sonic Mania was almost entirely developed by fans, and that's a near perfect experience, and I know there were a lot of veterans on this game. But here, I just can't help but feel like the original team was not present. It's honestly sort of disrespectful to the fans, to the original work, and to the characters and franchise. And to be honest, why make it a $10 game if you needed more money? Why not make it better and spend more time on it? Make it 20, 30, retail release. This felt way too unnecessary. Drawn to Life might be dead, or at a very minimum, an indefinite break, but that's okay. I've had a lot of people in my videos comment that it's fine if a series dies. Not everything lasts forever, and that's honestly true. I don't agree for every series, Jet Set Radio should have gotten more games, and Scribblenauts, I felt, only scratched the surface of its potential. But Drawn to Life, I think it really should have just ended on the DS. Not every series can be an insane moneymaker, not every series has ideas and passion behind it to make it live forever. That doesn't change the fact, though, that we can admire gaming history from afar, which ultimately is one of the reasons I make these videos about obscure series or games. I want people to play the first 2 Drawn to Life games, and I'm hoping many do because of this video. Even though there were some games along the way today that weren't good, I don't see the series talked about all that much, and it deserves to be documented. The good times, the bad times, and the Spongebob times. The first 2 games told a brilliant and creative story, something that really hadn't been done before in a kid's game. As such, if you grew up with this series like I did, or haven't heard of it, I recommend you cherish and play those original games again. In the same way a book can be read by generations and be remembered forever, and in the same way as even ancient cinema, Drawn to Life is art, quite literally, but figuratively, and is proof that the medium is beyond silly little products for kids. Video games tell stories.